Are you overwhelmed by the challenge of personalizing communication for thousands of students? That's where Element 451's AI assistants come in. From nudging prospective students to guiding those already on their journey, AI assistants don't just automate, they write, build, and optimize every step of your digital campaigns. Discover how at element451.com/AI team.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to the Future of Student Search, a special 5-part Pulse Check series brought to you by Enrollify and Carnegie. Hosted by Trent Gilbert, VP of Student Search at Carnegie, this series explores the evolution of student search, digging into demographic shifts, economic pressures, and the latest technology trends, and featuring industry practitioners who are successfully navigating these changes. Get ready for student search discussions ranging from the philosophic to the tactical. Trent and his guests will tackle talent and tech stack, full funnel strategies for connecting authentically, and leveraging AI for long-term success. Our goal is to help you better connect with students during their college search. Let's jump into today's episode.
Hello and welcome. I'm Trent Gilbert, Carnegie's Vice President of Student Search Solutions. Today I'm joined by Heather Daniels, who is the Executive Director of Admissions at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado. Prior to coming to CSU, she spent 11 years at Willamette University in Salem, Oregon, in both the undergraduate admissions office and the Graduate School of Education. In her role at CSU, she is part of the Division of Enrollment and Access, which includes admissions, financial aid, and the registrar's office. Heather earned her bachelor's degree at Edgewood College and a master's of education in organization, leadership, performance, and change at Colorado State University. Heather, thanks for joining today.
Thank you, Trent. It's nice to be here.
So as we've been talking in these series of episodes, we've been talking about the future of student search. And I think all good leaders, when they're thinking about the future of student search, they inevitably have to make decisions, and they have to make decisions that sometimes are maybe against the norm and are really about thinking differently. I know that you have, in recent history, you all and the team at Colorado State have embarked on kind of thinking about differently about how you process things and how you do things differently as it relates to kind of thinking anew and acting anew. Let's dive right in and share a little bit about some of the things that you all have done recently at Colorado State for our viewers.
I've been in my role as the Executive Director of Admissions since 2018, late in 2018. And at that time, when I became the Director of Admissions, I'd been at CSU for a number of years, and I was involved in kind of a whole bunch of different aspects within our operations. But as we were building our leadership team and thinking about where our priorities were at the time, so forth, we had just enrolled what was our largest incoming class in the fall of 2018. And we were having a lot of conversations about that class that came in, how they were going to retain, where they were coming from, the impact that it had on campus, and so forth. And so we actually spent most of that year digging into a couple different big projects. And one of them was an ROI specifically on our search purchases, search names, lead generation, how we were getting students into our funnel. Within our own office, we fortunately have our own systems team, which is phenomenal. And so we spent a good year or so really digging into where all of our students were coming from and how they were converting at each stage in the funnel. And at that time, we were spending lots and lots of money on really more of the prospect names and kind of hoping for that conversion to inquiry and then hoping from inquiry to application and so forth. And what we found is that there were certain sources that just weren't performing as well as others. And there hadn't been this type of an analysis on it in quite some time that any of us either were aware of or had been a part of. And so we were starting to think, okay, it seems to make more sense for us and who we are as an institution to really spend some time at that inquiry level. So thinking not necessarily the purchase of just a name, but trying to think about meeting students where they might have already expressed some interest in Colorado State University, wherever that might be, whether they've converted from prospect or they're coming in from different sources. And so that was kind of the start of it, was back in 2018, 2019.
As you dig into that, what did you guys find out?
So what we mostly found is really we paid a lot of attention to the data. So there were sort of these assumptions that were like, oh, okay, if we, purchase names from the testing companies, if we go with certain companies that we've had relationships with forever, like that's who we get our names from. But all of a sudden we're like, well, wait a second, those numbers, the data is not necessarily telling the story that we've been telling ourselves. So what if we shifted some of our resources? What if we decided to look at things just a little bit differently? So we started with some of the different companies that we were working with, changing some of our purchases. And like I said, focusing more on inquiries, less on the prospect stage, but then also thinking about certain geographic areas that were performing better with certain sources. For instance, California wasn't doing as well with this one, but maybe it was doing better over here. Let's put more of our resources for California into this source.
So on some levels, it sounds like let's examine how things have been performing, but then let's make adjustments based on what the data tells us.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So it was spending, and it took a lot of time. It wasn't anything that we were like, oh, let's do this. Okay, we're going to make these changes now. We had contracts, of course, that we needed to finish out. And we wanted to spend some time really analyzing the data. So looking not only at that first source, but second source, third source, and then also seeing where we were duplicating and finding that we were purchasing names from one company that we were probably getting the same from another, and we weren't deduping those. So we weren't necessarily maximizing our resources with some of those sources.
And right, for some of the students, I'm guessing they would probably also come organically into your pipeline no matter what. So then I guess it's probably that moment of, do we really need to be spending our resources to acquire that name if we know there's something about the student, right? Whether it's they're from Colorado or whatever, that they're going to come into your pool.
Yeah, definitely. So actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because a really great example of that happened right around that same time. So in the fall of 2018, for the 2019 cycle, the governor of Colorado started something called Free Application Days in Colorado. And so that first iteration of it was one day where every student in the state of Colorado could apply to any school in Colorado for free. And since then, it's continued. It expanded to 2 days, and I think it was 3 days, then it might have went back to 1 day. But anyway, what we saw in 2018, and if you look at our data, just this absolute spike in applications that we were receiving from the state of Colorado. And so all of a sudden it was like, okay, these students are applying to us. They have access to the application. We are able to work with them at the point of applicant. So again, we may already have them in our funnel as a prospect or an inquiry, but once they become an applicant, then they're just so much stronger of a prospective student.
Right.
And so we're able to really jump on those opportunities as applications.
So when you think about the sources that students are coming from, right, it's not just the testing agencies. When you all did this analysis, obviously the testing agencies are where you were getting some names, but there's other sources out there and there's other ways. And I think all good enrollment people will tell you it's about having diversity in sources. So can you share a little bit about not necessarily who those sources were, but like, what did you learn as it relates to not just the testing services, but also kind of all of those sources in your pool?
Yeah. So I think what we learned is that it felt like some of those other sources that we've continued to use, the student behavior and how they're interacting is different than signing up for a test and then receiving their name from a testing company, right? Like if somebody is on College Express, for instance, they're searching for an institution for whatever reason. They've been given that source from their college counselor, or they've done their own searches. So it's just a little bit different. And so I think that being able to, again, sort of maximize the student experience on those various platforms and then use that to our advantage of how they're interacting with us as an institution felt different than just a name coming in and then sort of communicating with them how we were with everybody else.
Right. So their affinity is different, right? Depending on how they're actually coming to you.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And so I think, one of the things that I think some of our listeners will kind of sit back and say is, sure, it's Colorado State. They can do things like this, right? And so they can do the research, and they can decrease how many names they're sourcing from the testing agencies, right? But I can't do that. So I guess, what advice would you give to an enrollment leader that doesn't have the brand cachet that is a state name brand flagship?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And I take that as a huge compliment because I'm proud of the fact that CSU is a nationally recognized R1 research institution and so
Right.
forth. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't take a lot for us to enroll our class. And especially in recent years, we've been very successful. This is working for us. So I'm thrilled. We just enrolled what I believe is our second largest incoming first year class that we've had at
Congratulations.
CSU. Yeah.
That's
So
huge.
I love it. This has been working for us, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it would work for everybody. And I think we just had to do things a little bit differently. So what we found is, kind of to go back to the decisions, is that so we get through the pandemic, we head into kind of the post-pandemic world of being test optional. And so what we found is that our applicant pool really leaned into the test optional aspect, and we weren't receiving a lot of test scores. We continued to not receive a lot of test scores for our applicants. And so thinking about that test taking source as one that wasn't necessarily a top priority for us. So really thinking about these other sources, other ways that students are interacting with us. And we all know every other enrollment leader who's listening to this is probably thinking, yep, there's so many vendors out there, right? There's so many sources. There's so many different ways to think about lead generation and what search looks like. And it's so different than what it has always been. And I think Colorado State had just depended on, this is the way we do it. We purchase the names, and there's this big load that enters our system, and then this is how we communicate. And kind of going back to our analysis, those students weren't necessarily performing at the rate that we could with these other sources. And that sort of aligned with what was happening in this test optional world.
And so, I think, though, if there's a lesson there, it was about taking a step back and questioning. I know we've always done it this way, but should we keep doing it this way? And how do we make adjustments? And I think no matter the size of the institution, there's something to be said about that part of the story. But I'd imagine when I would love to be a fly on the wall as these conversations were happening, right? On some levels, was there a factor? Was there a moment that was the driving factor of, we need to do this, beyond someone saying, hey, we should do this because we're a R1 research institution and we should research our data, right? What was the driving factor behind it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And actually something I think about a lot, because every year, this is the time of year, we just had our census date last week. So it's like, okay, how did this class land? And this last year with everything with FAFSA, this was a challenging year. And so every year since 2021, that's kind of when we made this decision ultimately, we are regularly analyzing, evaluating, reflecting, like, is this the right decision? Are we doing what's right? This feels pretty good. It's working for us right now. It may not be forever. We may need to adjust. And as we know, students are acting differently. I myself have a almost 17-year-old, so I'm watching him go through this process. I'm like, oh,
and the mail is arriving at the house.
Yep, exactly. And I'm like, okay, what are they getting from CSU and so forth? But I think that one of the reasons that we sort of went in this direction and decided to go away from sort of the way that it's always been done was to look at our mission and look at Colorado State University as a land-grant institution. We are test optional by law. We're test free by practice. So we are pretty open with our prospective students that the tests are really not part of the admissions process for us. We had already been doing some work with our institutional research prior to the pandemic to see how we were evaluating our students' likelihood of success, and we were finding more of a correlation with their high school performance, their GPA, the classes that they were taking, and less as it related to the test score. So we were sort of heading in this direction already. Then we became test optional. Like I said, as an entire state, and then by practice, really test free. So we accept the test, we'll add them to a student's record, but we're really not using them as part of the admissions process.
And so internally, right, I'm sure that there was probably, I mean, you just mentioned institutional research, right? There's lots of constituency groups internally as it relates to thinking through and taking on a project like this. What leadership lessons did you learn, right? I mean, let's take this out. Let's take us into kind of a little self-reflective moment. What leadership lessons did you learn? What nuggets of wisdom did you walk away from this experience with?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, so this is just sharing kind of more on the personal side. So the team that I work with in the Office of Admissions is a very collaborative team. My leadership style is very collaborative. I rarely make a decision and like, this is Heather's decision, this is where we're going. I have to run it by people like through and through. And as we were leading into this, our director of communications and marketing, our director of recruitment, our data analyst, our systems director, they were all like, Heather, look at the data. And my old school admissions hat was like, I don't know, this is different. This is unlike what every other institution is doing. Is this the right decision? And it was happening during a time of a lot of transition at my institution. We had a presidential change. We also had vice president change. So we were sort of living in a world kind of on our own in the Office of Admissions. And so I think the lesson is that I had the opportunity to make some decisions on my own with the support of my team. And I would be like, are you sure? And I remember the one day being like, okay, so we're not doing this, right? And everyone was looking at me and it's like, no one wanted to say it. They needed me to say like, yeah, we're not going to renew that contract. And it was like, okay, I just said it. And it felt really weird, but then also it felt like the right decision because it was backed by our analysis. It was backed by years of us going through and really trying to maximize our resources, understanding that we are a state institution, relying so heavily on the funds that we are given through Colorado State University and trying to just be the best stewards of our resources.
And so, right, so there's this change, but other things are happening in the world, right? I mean, like I'm thinking about the timeline of the decision. First of all, this wasn't a decision that happened overnight, right? You said you started this project in 2018 and it was like 2021 by the time it actually came to fruition. I mean, throw COVID in there, but like this is not something that was just like, oh, hey, we did this project in a month and made a decision, right? I mean, this is a long-term game.
Mm-hmm. It was a long-term gain. So kind of going back in 2018, we enrolled this large class that we were thrilled about. It was overwhelming for campus. So we spent some time with institutional research of like right-sizing our incoming class. So then we had a goal for 2019. It was a little bit smaller than 2018 and we hit it. And we're like, okay, this is good. That felt great. So we went into 2020 like, oh yeah, we got this. And then we know what happened in 2020. And then really 2021, even 2022 still felt like this recovery from everything that happened in that fall 2020. So through all of that, and then again, institutional changes across the campus. So new president, new vice presidents, all new rebranding that happened at Colorado State University, working on a rebrand, on a different type of relationship with our central marketing communications department, all in the midst of then also our responsibilities of recruiting and enrolling an incoming class of students.
Hey, it's Seth. Element 451 is hosting the AI Engage Summit on October 29th and 30th. This free virtual event features many of your favorite Enrollify creators and will explore AI's impact on student engagement, enrollment marketing, and institutional success. Learn to tap into AI to automate personalized outreach, improve your emails, streamline content creation, and boost campaign performance. Plus, hear directly from current students on how AI is influencing their engagement and campus life. Don't miss my opening keynote, State of the State, a candid look at where we are and where we need to go. The AI Engage Summit is your guide to understanding and applying AI at your school. Registration is free. Visit element451.com to save your spot. Now, back to the show.
And so we're rebranding the institution. We're adjusting how we're sourcing names, right? We're using our data. You know, I guess my question is there some sort of like modeling that you all wind up creating, like in order to gauge then to ensure, right? Like the enrollment manager in me is like, okay, maybe we have less names in our pool. Maybe we have different names in our pool that we don't have the same reliability from in terms of predicting yield. Like, how did you all navigate that predictability factor of how a class, to making sure you actually are going to be able to make the class you want to make?
Yeah, definitely. So right in the midst of all of it, because why not implement a whole new system? We also decided to start working with a company that helped us do some predictive analytics. And so we really have relied on them. It's been wonderful. It's worked really well for us to kind of think differently about how we're communicating with students early in the funnel and then all the way through to the point of deposit. And so that part, I think, is another piece. As we build our goals for the year, we do a lot of it based on historical performance,
As everyone does.
Yes, as you should.
Right.
And what we found is that as I mentioned before, those conversions just weren't at the same rate as that we needed them to be on the prospect side. So we knew it was really important to build our inquiry pool as much as possible. And we knew we had a greater likelihood of then converting to applications. And each year we continue to receive more and more applications, again, as other institutions. We're not alone in that at all. But thinking about our communication strategy with those students from the inquiry stage to the application stage, and then continuing through all the way to deposit and first day of classes. So we changed a lot of that, and then using that predictive analytic tool allowed us to really target certain students, even down to a student, or look at certain behavior and see, okay, the student's likelihood of enrolling changes if they do this particular thing. And so changing some of our tactics with our team to be able to really influence students at various points in the admissions.
So Heather, right, it's not just about where the students come from. It's also about how you're communicating with the students. And so can you share a little bit about maybe some of your approach as the students have changed, as the parents have changed, as the demographics of your population have changed? What have you all done in terms of making those adjustments as it relates to communicating with these students?
This is a work in progress, for sure. We just did an analysis this last year to see how many emails we are sending out. And I don't even know if I want to say what the number is.
I won't hold you to it. You can tell me afterward. How's that?
Yeah, exactly. And if anyone's interested, I'll fill you in. But it's
I'm guessing it's not a small number. Is that a fair guess?
There's a lot of zeros after it.
Okay.
And so right now, that is our focus and I think email for everyone, email is so easy, right? Like we have email addresses. For the most part, it's pretty free. It's pretty easy to set up campaigns. Like email's an easy fallback. And what we're finding is that we're losing students because we're sending them so many emails. So one of the big projects that our communications and marketing team has for this year is to cut it down. So to just think a little bit more strategically about the messages that we're sending and how we're sending them. Because not only are we within the Office of Admissions sending a boatload of emails, but our campus partners are as well. The colleges each have recruiters. They want to email. Everybody wants in on emailing. And so I think that we've cut a lot, but we have a lot of room to go there. So what we have been adding to our strategy is, of course, texting. That's also a really great way to connect with students. But again, I think we're starting to feel that students are reacting to text maybe the way they were reacting to emails not so long ago.
Right.
And we've got to have that kind of careful line of not spamming students and feeling like it's not a personalized message. So when we are texting students, we're using a tool where it's personalized. So it is hi, Trent, this is Heather from CSU. So it doesn't feel like it's like, hey, are you interested in Colorado State University? It feels more personalized, which is really important.
Like a human connection.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then the other is what I have found in some of the partners that we're working with is thinking about how to interact with students outside of text messaging and outside of email, but still through their devices, right? Like I know my child, they're glued to their devices.
Right.
And there are a lot of really great tools out there where there are in-app messaging that can happen. And so the students have to be a part of that community, whatever it might look like. But if we can engage with them in a way that doesn't feel like an email or a text message that they're getting from all the other institutions as well, that feels different. And I think it's a different way of meeting them. You mentioned parents. Parents are such a huge part of this whole process. And I feel like I've gone through this almost like evolution with parents. Like when I first was in admissions, I remember parents, it felt like parents were really involved. And then I felt like there was this period of time. It's like, no, this is the student's decision. Parents don't have anything to do. And now we've totally swung back right at the time that I feel like I am going through this myself with my child. And I was like, oh yeah, I went in on all of it. So I understand it so differently. And parents' involvement early on is really interesting. And I do believe that their influence is huge from a financial perspective, from a personal, what they want for their child. And for them to feel a connection to the institution is really important. Now, parents love email. We know that. Parents love webinars. That's something that we have found wildly successful at CSU. We started hosting a monthly parent-family webinar series where we align it with whatever's happening in the cycle. And so it's kind of cyclical. And I treat it like a talk show. This is me pretending like I am you. Like I'm trying to be a show host.
We all have a frustrated talk show host inside of us. I get
right?
it. Yeah.
I get it. Yeah. So I will invite guests to join me. And then we have kind of like this, a conversation. But it's live with families that are listening in. And then towards the end, they have the opportunity to ask questions. And then we answer the questions live. So I have it all sort of operating in the background where it's being facilitated by some of our staff members. But these have been one of our most successful events on the recruitment side for the last 2-3 years.
Wow.
The parents and family members love them. They feel like they're a part of it. They'll sit and listen to an entire webinar for 45 minutes all the way to an hour. Our no-show rate for those is so much less than any of our other events that we do. And we do a lot of communications with the parents leading up to it, but then it's just kind of part of our process and part of our calendar. So the first Tuesday of every month, there's a parent-family webinar that's going on.
And you're targeting those specifically to parents and families. Like it's not the communication to students, it's the communication to the parents.
Exactly. Yep. So we are targeting them. And sometimes during the webinar, we'll mention like, oh, your student might be listening in because we know some of those parents might be like, hey, you need to be watching this.
Right.
But it really is the messaging, everything about it. If it's a topic, our most popular is we do this sit down with CSU leadership. So we have our president, our provost, our VP of student affairs, and they're all phenomenal people to begin with. But my favorite thing is to ask our provost, like, tell us what a provost is. Most people don't know.
Most people have no idea.
No idea. And parents, they respond during it. They're like, this is so great. And these are human beings who care deeply about our kids and the experience that they're going to have at CSU. And they have that really great connection. And so, again, it's communicating with them to invite them to the event, but it's really trying to interact with them differently than an email or a text message.
But it also supports your institutional mission, right? I mean, like, I mean that you know, the alignment there to me is that moment of how are we serving the residents of Colorado? How are we living up to the mission that we have at Colorado State? And this is a way that you're meeting families where they're at. And I mean, I think this is a brilliant idea, right? As I'm thinking about even like a first generation family who isn't familiar, right? I mean, who, you know, higher ed is chocked full of words that like only higher ed knows. Provost, bursar, right? I mean, like res life. It's like, okay, what do all these things mean? And so it's about demystifying it. It sounds like it's about demystifying it for these families.
Definitely.
As part of the communication.
Yeah, I think leaning into our land grant mission in all of the work that we do has been kind of from the start when I started to tell you about our work in 2018, even up until now. Our director of recruitment, he was just kicking off the cycle with his team. And he was saying, you know, everything we do is with our land grant mission in mind. And so it's about creating access to higher education. And so I think that having that as our North Star helps us make the right decisions for students, meeting them where they're at. And, you know, you asked that question about, oh, of course, CSU could do something like this. And I laugh because, again, it's for all of us. It's hard to enroll a class, and there's a lot that's going on. And one of the approaches that I've tried to take at Colorado State University in my time here is to actually treat CSU just like the previous institutions that I worked at, that students feel like they're getting this personalized attention. They feel like they are a person, not just a number. And we enroll a class of 5,500 students, but the students don't feel like they're one of 5,000 plus. They
Right.
feel like they had this connection through the admissions process, and then we hopefully are handing them off in a way that feels seamless and that they feel this connection to an institution that's going to care so much about them.
Which really is kind of this theme of human connection that we've talked about in the previous episodes of the future of student search. Is it's really about this moment of how do we have human conversations at scale with human beings from our brand that is part of a human, right? I mean, it's that is this living, breathing thing. And I think that's one of the things that's just really exciting about all these conversations, and it's about thinking about the future, is if we can, as an industry, be constantly putting this human connection component at the forefront of our thoughts, it really will drive us to think differently and act differently when it comes to the work that we do. And so let me ask you a somewhat tangential question of all of this, right? You've said a couple times you're going through this process right now with your own student. And so as you're on seeing this perspective, right, seeing the admissions recruitment perspective from another standpoint and knowing it's still early on in the process, you know, has anything stuck out at you that has said we, whether that's CSU we or whether that is globally industry we, need to be thinking differently about beyond some of the obvious stuff that we've maybe already talked about?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. Because I feel even like a newbie right now with my son only being a junior in high school. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners are like, yeah, I've been there, done that. Hello, you're, just catching up now. But going through it and seeing, even watching him pick up a brochure, comes home and he picks it up, and what causes him to open it versus not open it, it's fascinating. And I was like, why didn't you like that? What did you like about that? Why didn't you like that? And then he's like, are you asking me because you care about me as your son? Or are you asking me for work? I'm like, both.
Both?
Yeah. So it was both fair. And I remember actually having this conversation with our president. So our president of Colorado State University, she has two daughters, and her second daughter just enrolled as a first-year student. Her older daughter is now a junior at CSU. And when she became president, her older daughter had just gone through her gone through the admissions process. And we were having this conversation about students right now and this whole idea of vibe, and that there's like this vibe that they get. And there's nothing that my data team can do about vibe, right? Like the vibe is a hard one. And I think that's probably one of our biggest challenges, is when a student shows up on our campus, or they get that piece of mail, or they get a text message, or they see a football score, or whatever it might be, that will or will not have them more or less interested in an institution. And you're trying to make sense of a 17-year-old brain, which my own son, I'm like, what?
Right. Right.
That's a hard thing. So we have all these challenges that exist just because of humans and their behavior. But I think being aware of vibe and what that means to students and what they care about and how they want that community, I think sense of place and sense of community, that's the one thing that I'm finding through this process with my own son, is that he's going to find a place where he feels like he's found his people, and his people aren't necessarily like him. I think it's who he wants to surround himself with, which may not necessarily be like-minded, but he's looking for a community. And I was like, okay, so how do we talk about our community? And in a place like CSU that cares so deeply on that human connection, I'm like, well, then you're going to go to CSU, right? But
Right.
I don't know how that's going to land. How that's going to work out.
At the end of the day, right, we're in a human business, right? And we're human beings. And as much as we try to quantify and qualify all of these different components about why a student chooses, at the end of the day, it's a personal decision. Right. I mean, college is an intimate product choice. And, it's funny is my wife and I have talked about, we're in this business. We've talked about, why did you choose to go to your institution? And she's like, I visited and there was snow on the ground and the kids are wearing flip-flops. It's like, okay, well, no admissions office can create that. But that was that inevitable moment where she realized that was the place for her. I'll never forget a top scholarship candidate at one of the institutions I worked at recently, who I was like, why'd you choose to come here? And she's like, oh, I visited and there were straws in the dining hall. And I really just wanted to make sure that I like drinking my drinks out of straws. And I'm like, okay, well, we now need to make sure that we have straws in the budget in the cafeteria, right? But there's those moments where I think as much as we try to pinpoint, like, here's why a student chose, yes, it's all those things. It's the community, it's the opportunities that exist, it's all these things, but it's also the things we just don't have control over. But I think our job as enrollment professionals is about painting the picture and helping the prospective student and their family understand that this is the place for them, or better yet, this is the place not for them, right? Because I think that's just as important as we kind of go and navigate through all of this. So
yeah, I think just to kind of jump off of that, I think that that's a big piece of the work that you are doing too, right? Like when you think about getting students to enroll in institutions and having to back it way up to the point that we're first engaging with them, whether that's in middle school or early in high school, it's being authentic to your institution. It's understanding the mission, vision, needs of the institution, trying to do the best that we can with a lot of different resources, a lot of different sources out there, and creating an authentic experience for the students. And again, if flip-flops on a snowy day is what's going to do it, then that's going to happen, or it's not going to happen, because there'll be the other student who doesn't want anything to do with that, right?
Right. And I think no survey ever will tell you like, oh, I want to go to a school where there's, kids are wearing flip-flops in the snow. It's just that moment that you have.
Yeah.
And it's that moment those students have. So Heather, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us and sharing your insights and kind of sharing a little bit about how you all are thinking differently and acting differently as it relates to student search, and really kind of thinking and being forward thinkers in the industry about the future of student search. So thanks for joining us today. And this concludes our podcast series on the future of student search. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
This Pulse Check mini-series has been brought to you by Carnegie. Carnegie is the human connection company. Whether you're in marketing, enrollment, advancement, or student life, a volunteer, or the president, success is predicated on connecting, literally and figuratively. Carnegie connects colleges and universities with students by fusing human psychology with marketing and enrollment innovation. Carnegie offers groundbreaking solutions that lead to action, enrollment, retention, and lasting affinity. Learn more on carnegiehighered.com.